Good morning. It's really good to see everybody this morning. A lot of good chatter going on, a lot of smiles, and still recovering from Thursday. Many of us are. I can see it already. People are starting to think, well, it's time to diet. But guess what? You got Christmas dinner coming up. You got New Year's dinner coming up. So just hang in there till the first of the year. But it is good to see everybody this morning. We're so glad that you can be here. If you want to turn to number 589, 589, we sing the first and third verses of To Christ Be True, 589, and then we'll go to our classes. To Christ be loyal and be true, His banner be unfurled, and borne aloft till this secure the conquest of the world. To Christ the Lord be true, ever true, for He will go with you and help you all your conflicts through. To Christ the Lord be true. To Christ be loyal and be true, in noble service prove your faith and your fidelity, the fervor of your love. To Christ the Lord be true, for He will go with you and help you all your conflicts through. To Christ the Lord be true. You may go to your classes.
Morning. It's good to have everybody with us this morning. It's first day of the week. We're going to be in Psalm 139. Psalm 139 is we're continuing to go through the Psalms. And as we go through these and realize as we talked about, we're looking at the 5 divisions or the 5 books of Psalms. We're in the 5th one. I was thinking about it the other day. I was looking at my sermon and thinking, what are we going to teach after this? Because not this psalm here, it's the last one, but we've been going over this for so long. But there's so much information in the Psalms, and it's great that we're able to do that and look to it and continue what we find in there. We know that Psalm 139, it basically describes the nature of God and His very personal involvement, as we would see in all of our lives and in all of ours that we're doing, that we're part of, and that we look to see described. Let's make sure our volume's on. It is. And knowing that we see that David, of course, is the author of the Psalm, that we find, and the overall message of the Psalm is, even though God is all-knowing and all-powerful, rather He cares about every individual human and wants them all to choose to love Him. And that's what God doesn't just want, it's what He expects from us. And we realize, because of everything that's been done for us and everything that's been done for everybody throughout the beginning of time. And if you ever start feeling, I guess you'd say, so you ever start feeling alone, or say maybe you feel like seems like the whole world's against you, like these things aren't working out right, things are going crazy. This is another one of those psalms that is a very good psalm to go read. if we ever get into that feeling and that time in our life, because it will get you through it. And it's a great psalm for that. And David realized that. David felt like there was so much, just everybody against him at one time. And he went to God and realized what God would do. So David writing a psalm is of what he went through. Same thing. It's inspired for us to know what we are a part of, what we can have in this life that we live today. So in Psalm 139, we're going to go ahead and read this. Yeah, go ahead.
I'll just make a comment to your opening remarks. When you talked about God caring for us, do you realize how many billions of people have lived, yet He, as your statement up there, He knows us individually. And you just hardly can fathom that sort of love and compassion and looking at his children. And for us to realize that He does know us. We probably sometimes think, how can He do that? He really doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, because you're right. I mean, you think today on the earth itself, there's just about 8 billion people almost. I mean, it's crazy how fast it's growing. And like you said, that's just now. I mean, you think back all the time, talk about what we see with God knowing us. And, you know, I think about that, like as if say you're in a mall, you're in an airport, that's just, you know, people are just, you know, right everywhere, you know, just everywhere, and you're like, there's just way too many people here. And that's only thousands of people. I mean, you can imagine, as you said. And that's remarkable to think that God knows every person and what they're doing, what they're thinking right now in this moment. Almost all 8 billion, right now. I mean, that's just hard to understand for us because we know we can't do that, but God can. And I think the more we know about His Word, we realize it and understand that, Bill.
David's writings have always been like spoken completely from his soul and from a foundation of faith, love, and trust. And even though written so long ago, I feel like it directly speaks to me now, even though it's been thousands of years ago that David spoke. And in conjunction with this, for all the good David did, and when he slew Goliath at a young age and turned around, and instead of being welcomed as a complete hero to the people, which he was, he had the head honcho Saul turn on him, right, and jealousy. And so how often would this have been so confusing to David that he did lose his faith, and everything he said, like in this song, it just is so enriching now. Right now, it feels as relevant today as it did when he wrote it, because we feel the same things he does.
Right, exactly. That's what's kind of remarkable sometimes to look at these removed thousands of years ago, and just read them and go, wow, that does affect me right now in this moment and today, whatever. And that's why God's Word is the way it is. It's a living Word. It doesn't die. It's something that just had all that long ago and is gone. It will always. This is remarkable about it. It don't matter how far we go in this world with I guess you'd say scientific design or whatever, things going on and things having, the computer stuff, everything being made. God's Word will never get boring, never get old. It will always mean the same thing it did back then as it does today, and it's part of all of us. Bill.
And for everything David was, courageous, I think he probably was a handsome fellow and a good-sized man, and courageous and kind and discerning. He reveals to us that he had his problems. He had his moments of help me, God, moments of please keep the wickedness from my heart. So we can all learn it just because we see a fellow Christian that by every account is always happy, is outgoing, is smiling. Every Christian has their own times that they sit there and go, please God, help me through this. And David did, and he shared it with all of us. But we need to remember that no Christian we see is without some issue that they, or problem, or whatever, that they have to deal with.
That's right. That's exactly right. Well, there's always going to be problems. There's always, I've heard people say, I haven't had a problem in a year. And I said, really? Let's go ahead and look at that year. I think it's great that they kind of thought, life, that's awesome, to feel that way. But we all know that's not the case. I mean, things are going to happen. Maybe small, even small, but we know the way life is. And but that's right, exactly. When we read songs like this, we know that no matter what they are, big or small, we can get through them. And it's because God is there for us. And that's what David shows in these verses. So let's go ahead and read these first 6 verses and see how he talks about this of God being all knowledgeable and just being everywhere at the same time, and just how important he is. So someone go and read that for us, please.
O Lord, you have searched me and know me. You know my sitting down and my rising up. You understand my thoughts afar off. You comprehend my path and my lying down, and acquainted with all my ways. For there is not a word on my tongue, but behold, Lord, you know it together. You have hedged me behind and before, and laid your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high, I cannot attain it.
Thank you. You know, when we read these verses, everything we were talking about earlier, that everybody commented on, we see how it's exactly what we read here. I mean, you know, that last part of it, we'll look more at this, but, you know, even David himself, one that was, think about this, one was actually receiving words from God. I mean, actually, you know, the visions and those things that would happen, and we see with him, and knowing that he himself couldn't even attain it. I mean, he just, you know, it's just too wonderful for me. And it's the same for us today, and we look at that as we see described. So these 6 verses, what they do is they just basically describe God's infinite knowledge, or we could say all-knowing is what we find there. You know, David understood that God was all-knowing, and he knew that God had the ability to basically search us and know each and every one of us. He knows us so well that, and this is probably even harder to understand, that God knows our thoughts. We go, okay, our thoughts, that's one thing. But he even knows the words that we're going to use and say before we even say them. And that's where, to the point, you know, where you're just like, how is that possible? And it's because God is the creator, and we see that in all of us. In fact, David, you know, I love David's words, what he says here, 2 Corinthians chapter 10, and what I mean by that is David, I said David, didn't I? Paul, as he describes these words for us in 2 Corinthians 10, 4-5, is someone go ahead and read this for us, please.
For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty in God for pulling down strongholds, casting down arguments, and every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God, bringing every thought into captivity to the obedience of Christ.
Thank you. So once again, you know, everything with the knowledge we see there, God will find, and bringing in captivity, knowing that God has that ability for that, and that we should move in that direction, understanding that. And it brings up this thought here, as we mentioned Wednesday night. Someone go ahead and read this one here, Romans 12:2.
And be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that ye may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God.
Thank you. So with this, we see this transformation, renewing of our mind. The only way to renew our mind in God is to read His Word, and, you know, to read His Word and pray to Him. And of course, this too, you know, the worship service, Bible study, you know, as we see that happening. It is one thing to control our actions, basically, in what we say. This is what David was trying to show us. But it is much more difficult to control our thoughts, isn't it? I mean, the thoughts just run wild sometimes when we see that, but we need to control them. And, you know, while we can hide anything, thoughts in our mind, guess who they're not hidden from? God. I mean, they're not at all. You know, if we have thoughts that we should not have, you know, and we get them under control, we get them where they need to be, and realize that people think they are getting away with their thoughts, whatever's going on, they're made from, you know, human beings. You don't know what my thoughts are. I don't know what your thoughts are right now. And, you know, but God does. And that's why when we live this life, when we look at that, we know that He understands that. But He doesn't just know that. He even knows our intentions of our hearts. All the intentions of our heart. He even knows what, you know, we're going to do, as we said, before we even do it. God's infinite knowledge means that He knows our past, present, and what? Future. He knows those things. And usually the idea of being all-knowing is difficult for us as humans to understand. That's why David, in the 6th verse, that's why he wrote this that we read just a moment ago. He says, such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high. I cannot attain it. In fact, later in Psalm, in verse 16, we're going to find that David says that God knew him before he was even what? Anybody know? Born. God knew him even before he was born. I mean, that's just like, wow. And so when we think about these words of God, when we think about God, this is, brethren, why we see that He has all that power, why we should be turning to Him with all things in our life. In fact, look at Psalm 147, verse 5. So I'm going to read this for us, another psalm that David wrote.
Great is our Lord and mighty in power. His understanding is infinite.
Infinite. What does infinite mean?
Never ending.
Never ending. It's just constant. I mean, have you ever seen on a board before where someone put a 1 and put just zeros, you know, all the rest of it's all zeros. Imagine this thing with the 1 there and the rest of it zeros. How many could count that? If there was a 1, and say about that big as those letters, those letters right there. You got a 1 and the rest of them are all zeros, you know, on the entire board. How many of us can count that? I don't know what that number is. Not at all. Now you think about infinite. Let's go a little step further. There is no number for that. I mean, that's it. It just continues forever of what we see. That's why David, when he told his son this, when we think about Solomon, notice what David said. So we'll go and read 1 Chronicles 28, verse 9 for us up there on the board.
As for you and my son Solomon, know the God of your father, and serve him with loyal heart and with a willing mind. For the Lord searches all hearts and understandings of all intent of the thoughts. If you seek him, he will be found by you. But if you forsake him, he will cast you off forever.
Thank you. This is an interesting verse where we see there that it doesn't just say that the Lord knows our hearts. What do you think about the word when you hear the word search? What do you think about when you hear the word search?
Looking for.
Looking for. I mean, you're actually putting effort in to find something, are you not? I mean, you know, when we're searching, how many here have searched through a file cabinet before looking for something? You ever done that? You know, you're just like, you're doing like this, and you know, and you're just looking, and you're like, okay, finally, and if you don't find it, it's really bad then, but when you find it, like, finally, I found it. And it was like in the middle of all that, and then now we think of searching. It's kind of like our minds today. I've always said this, someone says, you know, the older you get, you know, they say you can't remember everything, you start forgetting. I said, no, I think what it is, we have so much information up there, it's like a file cabinet. We're trying to go through it to figure out what's there. We're searching it out, and it takes time. God, imagine him doing that to your heart. Searching your heart. You know, searching for what is there. And brethren, this is why it's so important that we think about the goodness that is found in God, and we want that goodness in us. And because, you know, when God searches my heart, I want him to see that. I want him to see the goodness that is found there in his son and what we see. So Solomon was given a wise, understanding heart by God. And we see that 1 Kings 3:12. But just because Solomon was given that, does that mean he used it all the time right?
No.
He didn't. He didn't use it right all the time. In fact, we know he did a lot of times he did it wrong. And where he was. Did you ever comment?
No.
Okay. So as we see this with his wisdom, and which Solomon did have good times and good wisdom and good words inspired by God, he wrote these words. Let's think about these for just a moment, about these thoughts and basically to put them in practice, these great words of thought to put in the practice of our lives. So we'll go and read this for us. Proverbs 5:21, please.
For a man's ways are before the eyes of the Lord, and he ponders all his paths.
Thank you. So he ponders all his past. And, you know, a man's ways before the eyes of the Lord, I mean, God sees what our ways are, where we're headed. But it doesn't finish there either. Proverbs 15, verse 3. So we'll go and read that for us, please.
The eyes of the Lord are in every place, keeping watch on the evil and the good.
Thank you. So when we go back and we think about Psalm 139, verses 1 through 6, we can realize just from what we read there and other areas about David and other areas of Solomon and other areas of just others throughout the Bible, we can see what David means by this. That, you know, God knows when he's lying down, knows when he's awake, understands his thoughts and his moments and where he's headed and what he's going to do. In fact, Jeremiah, another one to think about. Look at this one here. Jeremiah tells us this in Jeremiah 32, verse 19. Someone read this one for us, please.
You are great in counsel and mighty in work, for your eyes are open to all the ways of the sons of men, to give everyone according to his ways and according to the fruit of his doings.
Thank you. Once again, your eyes are open to all the ways of the sons of men. That means everybody. And then finally, Hebrews. I want to go ahead and add what the Hebrew writer says in chapter 4, verse 13. Someone read this one for us, please.
And there is no creature hidden from his sight, but all things are naked and open to his eyes, of him to whom we must give account.
Thank you. So it's not just that God can see everything and read our thoughts, know our thoughts, search our hearts, but we're going to have to give an account for those thoughts and those things we do and the way we live. So brother, what we learn here real quick, just this part of the psalm, is that we can know that God knows everything because we have hundreds of prophecies that God made. Here's what's interesting, that God made that have always come to pass, always, 100% of the time. And without a doubt, God is all-knowing. If he wasn't, he would not be God. That's the easiest way to look at this. If God was not all-knowing, he would not be God. Think about how many people worship different gods. You know, these different gods that say, those gods know nothing. Let me rephrase that again. They know nothing. Zero. And the reason we can say that is because those gods were made up or invented or whatever you want to say by a human. And we see that and understand. They definitely know nothing of the future or the past, but they also know nothing of that moment. Because they're not a God in the way we would look at when we look at God our Father in heaven and what we find with Him. Which brings us a little farther. Let's move on to Psalm 139, verse 7. We're going to go ahead and look at verse 7 through 12. Whoever reads this, there'll be another slide with the rest of it. So you'll read that one also. So if someone will read that for us, Psalm 139, verses 7 through 12, please.
Where can I go from your spirit, or where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend into heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in hell, behold, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me. If I say, surely the darkness shall fall on me, even the night shall be light about me. Indeed, the darkness shall not hide from you, but the night shines as the day. The darkness and the light are both alike to you.
Thank you. So where is God? Where is God?
Everywhere.
Everywhere. That's exactly right. Everywhere. I mean, the 6th verse Psalm deals with God being everywhere, and here's the important part. He's not everywhere, you know, in the next couple hours, next couple days. He's everywhere at once, at one time. Now, how hard is that for us to understand? I mean, we understand it, but to actually, you know, because nowadays we can't do that. Although I have said this before, people say now, they go, well, wait a minute, I've seen you on TV, you know, on the TV or on Facebook, you know, and I'm not in the same state you're in, or I'm not in the same country you're in. I said, I realize that you have to turn that on. I said, I'm not everywhere. I said, I don't know what's going on. I said, I don't see what you're doing in your living room, you know, or what's happening here and there. And there's the difference, you know. A human being can be, as we see certain things because of technology, but we cannot be everywhere at once like God. And the purpose of that. Again, this is another idea, as we said, it's hard to understand, but notice how David points out that there is not a place where God is not present. Therefore, there is no place we can go and hide from Him. David says, it doesn't matter if He goes to heaven or hell, God is there. And we need to realize that. It's something very important here. God, you know, being hell, it doesn't mean that God would be in hell. There we understand what the devil saw. Some said, well, this is Hades, paradise, or torment. No, what it means is God knows everything that's going on. And that's what we realize, even in hell. He knows what's happening and everything with it. Because who created all that? God. And we see it and understand. The idea expressed in verse 9. We think about verse 9 talking about east and west. So David is saying it does not matter how far he goes east or west. God is there. And there's no place we can go that God cannot help and guide. It's pretty simple. Even if we hide, and this, I love this in this verse. Even if we hide in the darkest place, say where it's void of light, I mean completely void of light, it would not matter about the darkness and light because it is the same for God. He can see anywhere in those places and where they're at. I mean, how many here have hidden in the dark before trying to scare somebody? Anybody ever do that? I guarantee I have, and I've been beat up a couple times for it, but, you know, we see it and understand, you know, we do those things, and but God's aware of that, where we are. You know, to the faithful Christian, the thought of God being omnipresent should be comforting, not scary, you know, not a bad thing. It should be a good thing because it lets us know no matter where, you know, where we are or how dark it is, God is with us and can give us strength no matter where we go. And that's how we have to look at it. Any comments? Go ahead.
I was just going to say, you know, the idea of the darkness, we always think of that in relationship to sin,
Right.
that we're hiding, but even our sin that we think nobody else can see, and sometimes we think God doesn't see it, He does, no matter what we do.
That's exactly. I mean, yeah, you're right about darkness. Even movies that are made, you know the Star Wars, dark side, you know, and the light side, you know, we see it and understand. Doug, go ahead.
People that question these verses should actually think that there wasn't any TV, there wasn't a technology like this. This was written about 3,000 years ago. And, you know, there was nothing like what we have here today. So what he was talking about was what is there all the time.
Right, exactly. I mean, that's the way it is, and we see that, and God is just, you know, and that's what we were talking about earlier. These were written thousands of years ago, but still apply today to us, and you know that's why we have them. That's why we still have these words, and they're the infinite glory, and we would say knowledge, and you know being omnipresent and finding God that we see. In fact, Jeremiah records God, actually records record, you know, puts record, writes it down of what God actually says. Someone read this for us, Jeremiah 23, 24, please.
And not a God at hand, declares the Lord, and not a God far away. Can a man hide himself in secret places so that I cannot see him, declares the Lord. Do I not fill heaven and earth, declares the Lord.
So once again, you know, here's Jeremiah, you know, recording, you know, telling what God said to him. You know, God saying, am I anywhere I can't, is there anywhere I can't be? And, you know, it's one thing to hear David write that about God, but to have God actually tell Jeremiah this, it shows us the importance we see here. Our God is not off in the distance spying on us, you know, with high-power binoculars or something like that. Now, he is nearby because he is ever present. And that's a good and important thing. One man that learned from the experience that he could not hide from God was Jonah. Everybody remember Jonah? You know, what did Jonah try to do? He tried to run away as far as he could get, right? I mean, you think about this in Jonah, we see here in the plan of God, Jonah chapter 1. Evergreen Bibles, I'm not going to have behind me, but I want you to think about this for a second, of Jonah, and realize the importance of what we see described to us as we find him here talking about God and the importance of it that we see. Oh, come on, Bible. And what we find with this, we see in Jonah chapter, if someone gets there, go and start reading. That'd be great. Jonah chapter 1, verses 1 through 17, please. Jonah chapter 1, verses 1 through 17.
Now the Lord had prepared a great fish to swallow up Jonah, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights.
What verse was that?
17.
Okay, we're going to read 1 through 17. Mike, you took away the part. No, I'm kidding. Okay, so let's go ahead. Here,
1 through 17.
Yeah, 1 through 17.
Okay. Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, Arise and go to Nineveh, that great city, and cry out against it, for their wickedness has come before me. But Jonah arose to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. He went down to Joppa and found a ship going to Tarshish, and so he paid the fare and went down into it, and to go with them to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. But the Lord sent out a great wind on the sea, and there was a mighty tempest on the sea, so that the ship was about to be broken up. Then the mariners were afraid, and every man cried out to his God, and threw the cargo that was in the ship into the sea to lighten the load. But Jonah had gone down into the lowest parts of the ship, and lay down and was fast asleep.
Let me stop right there a second.
Okay.
So think about this. So as we're going through this, here it is. Who do you think's making the water the way it is? God. Yeah, it's not just all of a sudden this came about. And this was kind of funny. So Jonah runs to the boat, runs to get out of the country. I mean, you know, to get out where he's at, go to another area. And then it seems like even that, here it's all, you know, the waves going everywhere. And Jonah knows it's God, and he knows that, but he tries to hide a little farther. I'm going to go down on the bottom of the boat, down there where, you know, no one really goes to. I'm going to go down there, and I'm going to fall asleep. And so, you know, all this will disappear. You know, I won't be involved in what's happening here. And it's not the case. You know, it's not the case no matter how much. You know, that's what blows my mind is Jonah knew how powerful God was. That he actually thought that he could outrun God. That he actually thought he could go that far. You know, as human beings, as Christians today, I think maybe sometimes, maybe not on purpose, but subconsciously, we may think we can do the same thing. And we just can't, which brings us to the rest of this. Let's go ahead and look at verse 6. And I'll stop again. Go ahead, Ed, you read or someone else read, however you want to do it.
So the captain came to him and said to him, "What do you mean, sleeper? Arise, call on your God. Perhaps your God will consider us so that we may not perish." And they said unto one another, "Come, let us cast lots, that we may know for whose cause the trouble has come upon us." So they cast lots, and the lot fell upon Jonah. Then they said to him, "Please tell us for what cause, or for whose cause is this trouble upon us? What is your occupation? And where do you come from? What is your country? And of what people are you?" So he said to them, "I am a Hebrew, and I fear the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land." Now then the men were exceedingly afraid and said to him, "Why have you done this?" For the men knew that he fled from the presence of the Lord, because he had told them.
I'm going to stop you there. So now they know, they understand. Thanks. How we see here that he says that he told them, "I'm fleeing from God. I'm leaving my God as fast as I can and getting away." And so as we see this, we realize the next point that Jonah basically tells them to do what? What does Jonah tell them to do?
Cast him in the sea.
Just throw me in the water. Throw me in the water. God's not going to find me in there. And Jonah knows. This is what's crazy. Jonah knows you go into a sea that's boisterous, that there's a storm. What's going to happen to an individual?
You're going to drown.
You're going to drown. I mean, I think Jonah was so far at the point that he did not want Nineveh to have what they were going to have, the basically be able to be with God again, have that opportunity. And he decided, "I'm just going to kill myself for it." That's how far removed he was. It's just remarkable. But God tried to show him, "No, you can't even do that. I know you jumped in, so now I'm going to prepare." That's what's important. Didn't say some big fish just came. God, it says God prepared a big fish. And what's remarkable, see, God already knew what Jonah was going to do. And he prepared the fish, and what did that fish do to Jonah? We read in verse 17 earlier. Swallowed him up. And we see that. Can you imagine being in a fish for 3 days? I mean, how many people like cooking fish in the house? I mean, I love fish. I mean, I'll eat fish there, and if you cook in the house, what does fish always do? Especially fresh fish. Well, it stinks up the house, doesn't it? Now, you imagine being inside that. Yeah. Ooh, just like crazy to think what it would be like for 3 days. And imagine what it was like when you got spit out. How terrible that was. See, Jonah, at that point, when that happened to him, he knew there was what? Nowhere he could hide, right? It was done. And that's what we see about God. And that's what we find in areas like this. And we need to realize how important it is, a story like that, to emphasize to us how, God does know everything and everything a part that we see there. Which brings us to this verse here, verse 13 and 14. And it says, "For you formed my inward parts, you covered me in my mother's womb. I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your words, and that my soul knows very well." So this third section of Scripture speaks of God's unlimited power. And this is where we just see more and more power. It keeps going. While all of creation is proof of God's unlimited power, David focuses, notice this, on the creation of humans and the ability God has given us to reproduce life. David gives God the credit for forming him and covering him in his mother's womb. And David praises God for his marvelous works, including how he has created us. Now you think about this for a moment. When we begin to think about the complexity that is found in you and I of a human, and how he or she is made, it will blow our mind and make us begin to understand just how powerful and knowledge our God truly is. What is this behind me? Does anybody know? DNA. And so you have the DNA, you have these cells on top of the DNA, cells on top of those cells, cells on top of those cells, cells on top of those cells. It's just remarkable when you think about this and what you see and what is found here. And one thing really important to understand, I'm out of time, and we'll come back to this next week. John chapter 1, verses 1 through 3 are very important here, because we see that it tells us that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was all in the beginning, which is God. All things were made through Him, and without Him, nothing was made that was made. So what I want you to take away from this before we close is just that You know, we were created with words. We are words, basically, in a sense. And the reason I say that is because there's a doctor that's Ellen Stubblefield, who knows about the cells, the DNA, and everything about it. And he said these words. I'll just read these words to you, and I'll remind you of it next week. He said, each cell at the moment of conception, this is remarkable, is supplied with a library, you would think he's going to say cells next, of 1/4,000,000, here it is, words. Words. Commanding that cell exactly how many times to multiply and then when to die. You know, when we hear that, it makes so much sense about this behind us. And that of Hebrews that we see about the Word of God. And, you know, all things were created by the Word. That's what we are. We're not just cells and DNA things. We are words. And it's remarkable when you look at us that way. So next week we'll go ahead and look more about this, what we find here about the human's body was found in. And I'm going to discuss another thing. I'll tell you that because I want to show you some pictures a little bit later. I'll just show you this one last picture before we close. And you can think about, want to try to figure out what it is through the week. There you go right there. There's a picture. All right, so don't just say cells. This is actually something of our body. And you'll be able to look at it more next week. All right, that's enough time. All right, so I believe we'll go ahead and close there. And we will come back to this next week as we continue to look at this remarkable chapter 139 that David gives us. Any comments or questions before we close? Nope? Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.